You know, anytime I make a video criticizing a AAA company like Nintendo's shitty business practices, or whether it be Rockstar's shitty business practices, GTA 6 should not be $100. I'll have people in my comments, or even when I talk about it, they'll be like, oh, see, this is why indie games will take over, and this is why indie games are carrying the industry, and all that other stuff. And I'm like, no, the fuck they're not. And I don't think they will be, considering that indie games have a lot of problems, and not only that, but nobody really wants to talk about these problems. And you know me, I like uncharted territory, so today we're gonna be talking about the problems with fucking indie games. You know, something that not a lot of people talk about because the internet loves to hype up indie games. So, let's get right into it. But before we begin, make sure to pull a Brian banner and beat that fucking like button and subscribe button, as it helps me and also helps the channel. So, fuck it, let's continue. Now, I say that indie games are more so a personal investment because the thing with an indie game is that, unlike a AAA game where you pretty much know what to expect, you never really know what you're gonna get with an indie game, and that could be either really good or really bad to some people. I don't know, some people really like to gamble. And speaking of gambling, fuck steak. But anyway, back on track. The thing with indie games being a personal investment is that, again, you never really know what you're gonna get. So if you spend your money and the game is good, then, well, you got your money's worth. If the game was, like, okay at best, then, well, I mean, at least you were entertained, I guess. And if the game just isn't that good of an indie game and you spent like, I don't know, $20 or $30 or $40, because, indie devs really be charging that much, then, well, congratulations. You just pretty much wasted your fucking money. You just pretty much gotta spend money and pray to God that the game is actually fucking good instead of just being a pile of dog shit. Now, if they drop a demo, that's perfectly fine, and like, that actually gives you an idea of what the game is gonna be, and also gives you an idea on if you should buy it or not, if you really like the demo or not. However, most indie games do not do this, so again, it just dates back to it being a personal investment. You never know if you're gonna get something good, okay, or dog shit. And speaking of dog shit,
I will burn this planet down before I spend another minute living among these animals.
To any indie game dev watching this video, or you want to make your own indie game, do not fucking do this shit, because this is one of, if not the worst thing I've seen indie games do, and it pisses me off. Little rant aside, the whole thing with the chapter system is that, you just drop chapters of the game instead of dropping it fully, and I don't really think it benefits the game at all, because, well, you have to wait years for chapters sometimes. Like, the two biggest examples I could think of are, like, Dark Deception and Deltarune. Dark Deception, everyone was kind of talking about, like, the latest chapter when Corey Kenshin played it, and then now it's like nobody really seems to be talking about it. And with Deltarune, if the game even has 8 chapters, considering it started in like, 2018 or 2019, you'd have to wait like a decade to actually play the full game, which is insane, and in an era where everyone's competing for your time, it doesn't really serve that good of a purpose. Especially to people like Toby Fox, who dropped a finished indie game like way before Deltarune. Again, in an era where everyone's competing for your time, why should I bother with an indie game that literally just has chapters dropping every few years, meaning I have to wait every few years, like maybe 2 or 3 years, to actually get content. And I'm really sorry to drag this point out, but as a comic book reader, I kind of want to draw the comparison between this whole problem with indie games and the story Doomsday Clock. For those of you who don't know, Doomsday Clock is the comic sequel to Watchmen, even though Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons never worked on Doomsday Clock. Doomsday Clock had a lot of hype surrounding it, mainly because of its namesake. However, it never really took off for a myriad of other reasons, and I'm not trying to make this a Doomsday Clock video, even though me personally, I actually kind of like Doomsday Clock. It's kind of a guilty pleasure. But one of the biggest problems, and to me the biggest problem overall, was the fact that the issues came out monthly. Meaning that you had stories that came out weekly, and then you had Doomsday Clock, which would just come out monthly, meaning that if you were very invested into Doomsday Clock, you would have to wait a long time, so you might as well go read other shit. It's pretty much Doomsday Clock syndrome, except worse, because the wait is usually years. And I have a question, okay? I have a question. Someone should give me a perfectly civil and reasonable answer as to why I should wait on an indie game such as Deltarune and Ultra Kill, games that aren't even finished and are essentially handing you crumbs that you get every 2 to 3 years, when I could just go play other games and just not really have to worry about waiting every 2 to 3 years for a Deltarune chapter. Like, by the time Deltarune is finished, a lot of the fan base is probably gonna leave or not play that game because they waited way too long to actually drop the full game. Like, a majority of Deltarune's fan base base is probably gonna grow up and then not actually play the full fucking game just because Toby Fox took way too long with the full game and he just dropped chapters instead of actually dropping the full game. And then Ultra Kill, like, bro, I'm sorry, but like the thing with Ultra Kill is that this game has been in development since 2018, was in early access in 2020, and it still has to drop levels, and the game isn't even fully finished, but people treat it like it is. The chapter system sucks because it benefits nobody. It doesn't benefit the developer because they have to scrounge and rush to actually drop something that's not the actual full game. It doesn't benefit fans because the fans have to wait a long time for these chapters to drop, and at that point they're probably playing something else entirely and they're not really going to play your full game because you took too long. Again, in an era where everyone is competing for your time, it is a detriment. And well, speaking of detriment,
Shame. Bad vampire.
I'm gonna keep this one short just because there's not really much to explain here, but look, dude, if you're gonna make it a point to promote your indie game that, oh, it's way better than insert game that was actually the inspiration for my game, then nobody's gonna buy your game. Like, there was this one indie dev taking the piss out of Zelda, but his game was inspired by Zelda, so like, congratulations, you're ass backwards, bro. And there's a clear difference between people who do what they do because they love it, they do it for money, or they do it out of spite. And usually, when people do it for money or spite, it's not really that good. And what does that give the impression of people who actually want to play your game, or better yet, people who see your game at first glance? If you have a big ego, or you're making this game out of spite for another series, then, well, your game isn't really going to take off because there's going to be a noticeable absence of quality, much like every work that has been done out of spite. That, or they're going to look at you just shitting on any game, even though it's the inspiration for your game, and they're going to be like, that guy's an asshole, he seems like a douche, I'm not going to play his game. And I get it, making a game is not easy. However, you do need to tone down the ego and the spite and actually put more time to your project, and I'm sure it might actually do good. Just tone down the artist ego and just tone down the spite and, just lock in a bit, and things will actually maybe turn out your way. Because it pains me to see creative people make shit out of spite and then it doesn't do well because the quality is garbage despite all the creativity that somewhat went into it. Another thing that pisses me off is the fan base.
What the fuck?
Now, to me, there are three kinds of indie fans. You have the first one, which is pretty much the most simple one. It's pretty much just regular people who just so happen to play indie games here and there. Like, they enjoy the game, and they pretty much just kind of move on with their day. Now, however, I can't say the same for the other two spectrums of indie game fan. And then you have the spaz. The spaz is the kind of person who will send unfunny memes in your chat, but they all relate to the same indie game that they like. They'll do it with any meme, or they'll make really bad memes. Like, I've just seen a lot of bad Silk Song memes. That's like the biggest example I could think of the spazzes. Same goes for like a lot of other indie games like Ultra Kill. I get that you like those games, but can you please shut the fuck up about it? And then you have what I like to call the indie game supremacists. Like, these motherfuckers, had they had a whole different ideology, they would be thriving on Earth X, bro. Like, anytime a AAA game messes up, they'll be like, oh, this is why indie games will rule the land of gaming. Indie games! Like, okay, chill out, Earth Xamite. Like, chill out, bro. What these people fail to realize is that indie games, much like AAA games, have their own problems that need to be fixed, and it's up to the developers to fix those problems. They fail to realize that both not only can a big corporation pretty much fuck up, but so could a small individual artist. And they will try to convince you that indie games are overall way better than AAA games, despite the fact that not a lot of indie games get popular, and also not to mention not a lot of indie developers even take advantage of the popularity of their game. I think the only one that I could think of is Scott Cawthon, really. Scott Cawthon's the GOAT, though. But my point is that both companies and indie developers can mess up, okay? They could pretty much mess up, and also not to mention that AAA actually can give people jobs. Meanwhile, with indie games, they're not really giving people that. The whole ideology is flawed because of the fact that both AAA and indie developers are capable of fucking up. And it's the job of the developers and or developer to actually make a quality product. Both sides are not perfect, and just like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't think indie games will take over like a lot of those people say, and or a lot of people in my comments say, just on the basis of the issues that I talked about in this video. Both of the spaz and also the supremacists pretty much turn away people from indie games because they think everyone that plays indie games are like that. It just gives people leverage. Same with all those problems I just mentioned in this video. It just gives people leverage to not really support and or play indie games. And if these people really think that indie games are going to take over and that AAA games will become obsolete, then, well, indie games have a lot, and I mean a lot, of catching up to do. The chapter system has to go entirely. I would rather you pretty much just wait a decade and then release your game that's fully finished and I could fully play all of it than just drop individual chapters every 2 to 3 years. They should try to release either some trailers here and there if they're able to, or release a demo so that way the personal investment factor is kind of gone, because that's one big detriment to indie titles. And overall, I think the fan base of indie games needs to calm the fuck down and stop with the supremacist and spaz bullshit, as well as just the indie developers need to kind of tone down their artist ego, you know? If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and also leave a comment on what you want me to talk about. So long as it's not a political topic, then, well, I'll talk about it maybe. Or if it's like a lolcow topic, I don't really like doing that, just on the basis that I feel like it's repetitive and oversaturated. So yeah, just drop it and I'll research it, or at least try to research it and then talk about it. But anyways, it's the end of the video, and I don't want to bloat this video's fucking runtime. I mean, I rarely make 10-minute videos, but like, holy shit. Okay, end of video. For real this time.